Hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. I never can tell if this is working or not. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Maddie. I don't think I ever remember to introduce myself, so I am an intern here. And today I'm going to be animating a little bit, as I do. I've done a few different things on these streams, but most of my job is animating, so doing some more of that. Let's pop into Blender here. So this is the gardener, main character for our game. Hello, yes. Okay, I can see you. Hi, Adrian. What am I doing today? That's a good question. I don't know. I'm a little bit tired today. So I apologize if I ramble. I'm going to be working on fixing up this walk cycle. We had one, but it wasn't timed correctly, so we had a lot of sliding. Because this is a treadmill animation, which means that it's not using root motion. I can show you the difference right now. With root motion, you can see this blue bone here moves forward. Without root motion, that's what the animation looks like. So most games, quite a few games nowadays are using root motion, which means that the speed of the character's movement is controlled by the animator. Obviously the game designer picks a speed and tells the animator how fast to animate it, but if you want to edit the speed of the character, you have to do it through animation. Traditionally, people would have used treadmill animations, which doesn't have motion. The feet are just kind of sliding along the ground at a predetermined speed. So I'm using the root motion, the root bone here, to animate to make sure that the feet aren't sliding, but we're actually going to be using a treadmill style and moving the character through code. Let's see. So I had this not sliding earlier today, but then I realized that I had the character at the wrong scale, which was a whole thing, and thank you, Fred, for helping me figure that one out. This is what happens when you forget to check the scale of your models when you put them in Unity. So anyway, I am currently in the process of fixing that, and then the other thing I'm doing is actually animating the rest of her, because as you can see, she only is moving 3 of her limbs and part of her hips. Yes, non-sliding animations will be great, and thank you for implementing that. Let's see. What do I want to do first? I think I want to fix the legs first. And I'm gonna go over here. Oh man. I don't know if you can tell, but sometimes this mouse twitches just a little bit, and I'm not entirely sure why. Where are you? Okay. I shouldn't be able to select you. Basically what I'm trying to do right now is just disable the gardener being selected. What am I selecting right now? That is very strange indeed. Oh, my bad. There was a duplicate. I did this to myself. Okay, here we go. This is the one that I'm there. That's the one I was trying not to select. Okay. Back to the task at hand. I don't know if I animated the gardener at any point on this in any of the streams that I've done. I don't think I have. Basically, one of the reasons I have to restart this walk animation, I have another one, but one of the reasons I had to redo it, or decided to redo it, I guess, is that I actually edited the rig after the fact, which you probably shouldn't do, but here I am, and I added a foot roll to it, so basically the rig can control her foot going back and forth, and this foot actually is slightly rotated. So it's not a perfect, obviously you can see right here that her foot is kind of digging into the ground too much, but that's just because the whole foot bone is rotated. There's an 80% chance I'm going to mention the mouse twitching a whole bunch of times, just because it seems to be in a particularly foul mood today. Anyway, let's see. Adding a foot roll to the rig just basically means that it's easier for me to animate a walk and run because I don't have to rotate the bone and then rotate the toe, I can just rotate one bone that figures out what needs to be done. Yeah, so that's an example of the rig doing part of the work for me, which is very nice. Okay, so what I'm looking at here, classic graphs. The green zigzaggy one is the direction that the bone is moving. The feet bones are moving in the Y direction, which is this way. So, in order to prevent this from sliding, which it is now, I just need to select these. I need to increase or decrease the amount of movement that happens in the Y direction. So what I like to do is find a spot that the foot stops, the first frame that the foot is squarely on the ground, and then I just put the 3D cursor basically exactly where the foot is, and then I watch until the end of it being on the ground. So you can see this line here to see where the foot ends up. And this is very, very far off from what it should be. So I'm thinking I probably have to scale this up. Oh yes, this is going to be fun. So you can see that the foot's stretching a lot, and that's because she actually needs to walk much faster than I had animated originally. And it looks like... I did this to myself. Okay, I just deleted the animation window preset because I hit the Windows key by accident. This is gonna be a day. You'll have to bear with me. I have to reset up what I had going on here. One good thing about Blender is that you can just drag windows wherever you want and fill them with whatever you want. So I would like, I think the dope sheet. Yep. And then the graph editor. Okay. No. What a time. This mouse is just being mean to me. So you can see very clearly that this is very, very stretched. Which means that I'm gonna need to adjust the timing of this as well, not just the distance that she covers. And yeah, okay. Let's see. Push this back. You can watch this as she slides forward. Her animation isn't playing fast enough to keep up with the root bone. And you'll have to forgive this weird jarring arm here. Basically what's happening there is a bunch of constraints are kind of overriding each other a little bit, which is terrible. That's completely on me. I have learned a few things since I rigged this character, and it's quite likely that I will actually fix this arm and redo those animations, just because it drives me nuts every time I see it twitch like that. It's kind of hard to predict what the actual animation will export as. Yeah, anyway. That's a whole thing. So I think what I'm going to do is actually speed this up first, and then I will adjust the distance. Smear a walk cycle. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. I've heard of the term, but not in animation. Sorry, you'll have to clarify and then I will answer your question if I can. I think I'm gonna do a lot of hms and haws today, largely because I'm tired and I seem to do that. I think I'm gonna get this to go to 30. Yeah. I'm gonna drag these keyframes until they go to 30. Hopefully that will speed up my walk. Yes, okay. So even with it sped up, you can still see that it's sliding quite a bit. Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I can definitely and will definitely stretch that a little bit. That makes sense. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Her legs do actually have stretch to them. You can probably tell if I do that. I did actually put that in the rig, thankfully, so it is completely possible for me to stretch it a little bit beyond what the bones would normally be able to do. I don't want to do it too much, just because if it stretches too far, it'll look weird no matter how stretchy this character is, I guess. Could be wrong, though. This is still going to stretch quite a bit. Oh, silly bean. I remembered what I did. It's like, this looks like exactly what it was before. It's still moving quite a bit. And that's because these keyframes out here, the root bone specifically, should not be scaled. Because if I scale the root bone's keyframe here, it also scales the distance that it covers, which basically just defeats the purpose of me doing that. So where do these end up? I'm getting old, I can't see. Okay. Right. Okay. I need to scale these back so that they go to frame 12. These keyframes here. Which is what they were before, so. Unfortunately, it's a little haphazard to be scaling stuff like this because there's a potential for me to lose information. If I scale it too much, you'll notice that, I want to point at the screen, but I keep forgetting that you can't see me do that probably. Sometimes they'll overlap, and then they'll overwrite each other, and I can't tell which one overwrote which keyframe. And that's just because it snaps to the nearest frame. It's easier to animate with nearest frame on because then I can easily overwrite like a, what are they called? A keyframe. Because I can just set it to that, move it, and then that'll overwrite perfectly. If I don't have that, and I go later, why are you still snapping? I don't think I've seen it do that before. Usually it doesn't snap when I tell it not to snap. Nearest second, nearest frame. Anyway, I was gonna show you a thing, but apparently Blender just really does not like me today. I swear I know some things. Very small amount of things. But apparently Blender is not one of them today. Oh well. That's what I get. Ah, that's better. Okay, so you can see now that I've sped up the actual part of her animation and not the root motion, she doesn't slide nearly as much. In fact, I think she's sliding forwards. Yes, okay. So she might actually, her feet might be going a little bit fast. There is a correlation between the root bone and the feet. You can tell by this slope here, the blue slope, which is the Z direction, which is that way, this blue arrow here, correlates with the Y direction of the feet, because that's their forward vector. So in theory, this line here should be the same slope, well, the inverse slope, as the root bone to perfectly cancel out. And this is largely how I do root motion animation. I used to just do treadmill animations and not use root motion at all, and it was kind of hard to determine if the feet were moving at the same speed. I don't know why I did it that way for a while. I guess that's just me learning. Okay. I'm not entirely sure how other people do root motion animations. This is just how I do it. Moved on me. Oh, right. I need to grab that. I am not liking what's going on here. feel like that just is wrong. Which foot are you? You're this one, aren't you? What is happening to you here? What if I delete this? A little bit smoother. It's a very zigzaggy line. You'll notice that these are like perfectly sharp. That's because this animation is so fast that I felt it was a little bit necessary to use, well, basically break the laws of physics. So she is moving her foot and then without any acceleration or deceleration at all, just goes a different direction. And that's just to help me animate this sliding, or fix it sliding. If I had a little bit of ease in and ease out here with a little bit of acceleration, it would be much harder to control the slope of this. So in this case, I usually just break it. I feel like usually I'd have something to say, like something that I'm thinking about while I'm animating. Today I'm just a little tired, so you're probably gonna get a lot of quiet from me. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I will try my best to answer them. This is the end of the foot pushing off. Like at that point it pushes off, so it doesn't make sense that it does, that it is so jagged. And I can round this part out. Other than it was doing this, and I didn't like that, so it's the small things. Okay, so now her foot, very much, kind of hard to see, but it very much sticks in that spot. It's not 100% perfect because this slope is probably not exactly identical and inverse to the other one, but that's pretty close. I can see just a little bit of a slide if I focus on that, but at the size that the gardener is in game, it's not going to matter. That pixel will render that foot there, or it won't render the foot being there. The same goes for this foot. I'm sure there's like a scientific way to do this, or I probably could have copied the other graph and then flipped it. Haven't done that before though, so this is what you get. Nice thing is I only have to adjust the curve one time, and I've set it to loop itself, so it just keeps going. It's easy enough to check. It's so fast. With this animation in particular, I wanted her to kind of look like she's way more spry than she should be. Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense that she can do this, but yet she does. I know I didn't want to put a jog in, just because it didn't really convey the sense that she's older. Like, too much vertical movement and having her feet kick up too much. I figured that wasn't exactly what I was going for. The problem is, with a main character for a game, you don't really have the luxury of just saying, oh, well, we can just slow down their speed and it won't matter as much, because if you're the player, you want to go places and you want to be fast. So with a gardener, with an elderly lady, on one hand, you want the player to be fast so that the player isn't just stuck, pushing forward going, why am I a turtle? But on the other hand, you don't want to make her run like a space marine or something at full sprint. So that's kind of probably one of the biggest challenges about this particular character and her animations, is that I don't want to make her look like an average regular human ripping around at however fast people run. Which is why this kind of comes off as really fast. Almost comically so, I would say. I do enjoy watching her just kind of prance around. Even without the rest of the animation. I think it's pretty funny, but hopefully I'm not the only one. I'm also feeling like her hips are a little too far forward. She's not... Yes. On one hand, I want the line of motion to be, forward, so that she does actually look like she's going forward. But this is stretched a little bit more than I would like. Now I have to remember which graph goes for which. That's up and down. This one is forward and back. She's got a very purposeful walk, I think. I'd like to think that with the way she's posed, she looks like she's walking with a purpose. The nice thing about walk cycles is that they're all just a bunch of sine waves, sort of. At the end of the day, I think you could probably animate a walk cycle with just sine waves mathematically, like without having keyframes and being able to grab stuff and pull it around. Some of it would look a little funky. Like it would look like it was floating a little bit, but by and large, you could do it, I think. I shall give you an example. With X, it's just an inverse sine wave or cos. I don't remember. This is why I'm not a mathematician. And it goes from, its peak is on one side and its trough is on her other foot, or her other step, basically. Whereas up and down is in between. It's also offset right now. If I grabbed this, pulled it back, you would see how they line up. For every, this is basically twice the X and Y. And with those two curves, or those two waves, you can basically get everything you'd need for a walk or even a run, probably. Obviously, it's nice to have the ability to grab stuff and move it and exaggerate it on certain things. Like, if a character had a limp or something, this would not work. This kind of relies on the fact that largely she's symmetrical. The difference with the gardener is that she is actually holding a cane. So for the bottom half of her, largely, you can use a bunch of curves. That's a lot of curves that are identical on both sides. But her cane offsets that a little bit. Instead of having both her arms just swinging back and forth, you've got one arm doing one thing and the other arm doing something else, which means that I have to pay attention to what's going on in her ribs. And torso a little bit too. After all, everything is a little connected, so it's not like you can animate one thing completely in isolation and not think about what's going on with the rest of her. Everything has weight. If she were to pick up her hand farther than, you know, something over here, she'd have to be pretty strong, or else she'd have to kind of take some of the weight and lean on her legs. I mean, she's got a pretty giant backpack too, so that kind of offsets a lot of the weight. I guess the main idea that I'm trying to drive home is that you can't just animate one limb in isolation without thinking about how that affects the overall weight and positioning of everything else. And I really still don't like that popping. That elbow. Frankly, I'm not even entirely sure what I did for that. I think I did some sort of weird parenting thing where some of these bones don't inherit the rotation of the ones before them, and it also can be an IK chain, and there's a few other things that are going on in there, and that's why it's popping all over the place, because it's trying to solve for something and then solving for it again, and every frame it gets updated. And I don't even mean just frames like the timeline frames, but like frames in Blender. Like when it redraws stuff, sometimes it'll snap it the next time it redraws the entire image, I think. Could be wrong. Whenever Blender decides to call the solving functions, it snaps. I have to say, I do really like how mathematical a walk cycle is, though. Like it's very, I don't know, there's just something about looking at a very nice curve like that and being like, yes, that's perfectly identical, or like it's kind of symmetrical. In this case, obviously, these two troughs are actually scaled a little bit, so they're not perfectly like a sine wave like this one. But that just gives more emphasis on the up part for her walk, so she's more bouncing a little bit. Anyway, I just like that this is so simple and it's predictable. It repeats itself perfectly. Which I'm sure if you looked at someone walking in real life, it wouldn't quite do that. There would be like an overall curve, but you'd have all sorts of little details that kind of throw off each step. You take a step differently if you're looking this way, or you're holding something, or even if you're just thinking about something, or like something surprises you. Like there's a whole myriad of things that could affect the way someone walks. But for games, and for time's sake, you can simplify it down to a bunch of sine and cos graphs. One thing that I've done differently, I feel like now I'm just going to talk, I'm not even going to animate, I'm just going to sit here talking to everyone. One thing that I've noticed that I've done more recently with animation is that I tend to start with the legs and the hips, or if most of the motion is coming through the arms, if like the big important part is coming through the arms, then I start with those limbs. I've found that I do less and less of posing every single thing for one frame and then going to the next keyframe and posing every single thing. If that makes sense. It is a lot like a tiling texture. Also, I hope you get feeling better, Matt. For people who don't know who Matt is, a friend of mine from college, he's not feeling well today, so hope you get feeling better. Anyway, it is like a tiling texture, though. There's something nice about that, I don't know. And I feel like you could do a lot of procedural stuff with it. Like, if you had the ability to go in and be like, oh, I'd like to make this particular creature a little more like bouncy in its steps, then you would find, you know, the up and down curve and then maybe scale it in some way on this side. Maybe someone could figure out how to do that in code. I'm pretty sure someone could do that. I don't think I could do that, but I'm pretty sure someone could do that. And then you'd be able to get all sorts of interesting styles without actually having to animate. I feel like I'm all over the place today in terms of things that I wanted to talk about. Right. So, the reason that I've started doing animating kind of the most important limbs and the hips and then everything else is that sometimes I don't immediately know what's going to be happening with the rest of the body or with the accessories. Largely this is applicable to accessories. If I don't know what the motion is going into it, it doesn't make sense for me to try to pose these, like the bag or her antlers. Anything that has some sort of follow-through, I tend to do way after I've figured out what the rest of her is doing. And that even applies to arms a little bit as well. In this case, I really wanted to get the feet moving the way they were moving because in this case, the arms are secondary to me. So with this arm, she is actually following a regular walk cycle, which means that in all likelihood her arm would be swinging to counterbalance what her legs are doing. So at this point, her arm should not be over there, it should be in fact right here. If you spend any amount of time watching people walk, I don't know when you would, unless you're an animator and that's what you want to do, or you just want to watch people walk, you'll notice that everyone walks with their arms differently. Some people swing their arms really far forward, some people have their elbows kind of tucked in, some people walk with their elbows out and their shoulders kind of set forward. And even within like more feminine walks and more masculine walks, you'll see all sorts of variations. Sometimes one arm will swing more than the other, which is always kind of interesting to see. Some people's shoulders don't sit exactly straight. In all likelihood, most people's shoulders don't sit straight. I know mine aren't symmetrical. If I were to stand flat and like look into a mirror, one shoulder is slightly higher than the other. Jazz hands when you walk. Yes, everyone should do that. It would be a little confusing, but it would be amazing. Kind of want to animate that now. And some people have very like limp arms. That was another thing that has surprised me a little bit. Is watching if you watch people walk, is sometimes you'll have people that are very set in their walk and they look very direct about it because they won't have any sort of follow through, no limp noodles. But other people are very casual and they just kind of swing their arm and their hand will come up and rotate and then it'll come back down. I can't swing my arm too much because I'll hit the desk and I don't even know if you can see any of that. But it is really interesting to see how people carry themselves, and then as an animator, like how can you kind of boil that down and accentuate it to make a character. With the gardener, she's very jelly-like, so I feel like she would have a bit of follow-through, whether she wanted to or not. But in contrast to that, she also has a very determined walk. You can see with her legs and her hips that she's going pretty fast and she's, going where she wants to go. In the other animation I did, which I can show you. Where are you at, though? Here we go, Action Editor. The old run, which is broken, so forgive the fact that her feet don't actually move. And it's a different looping speed. This one loops at 16 frames, which means it probably loops at 15 frames. Anyway, you can see that her arm is kind of this weird mix of having a bit of intention. She actually puts her shoulder forward first, then the rest of her. So she's kind of walking with her shoulders, which is traditionally a more masculine thing to do. Like if you watch a really big buff guy walk down the street versus like a little girl or something, the guy most likely will walk with his shoulders. And then traditionally, like girls will walk more with their forearms kind of swinging and less with their shoulders. As far as I've seen. I could be wrong, but that's generally how I've noticed people walking. The other thing that gives this a little more intention, you can see if I slow it down that she does actually have quite a bit of follow through. Even her forearm, this bone here, has a delay, and then her hand delays even farther after that. It still gives a little bit of a intention to it, I think. Perhaps because this follow through isn't quite as delayed as it could be. I feel like this talk is very much like, how do you add personality to sign graphs? If I move this, you can see that you get a completely different looking animation just by moving one graph. And it also looks like there's more than one keyframe going on over here. That makes sense. Okay. I feel like these need to move. No? Okay. Well, they're content to be where they are. Anyway. What's going on with this one? Ah, I see what's happening here. For whatever reason, I actually animated the graph. I animated the offset into the original keyframes. Usually what I do is I'll animate like a sine wave like this, and then I'll offset it after the fact, but in this case I actually animated the offset and added keyframes. You can see that there's an extra keyframe there because I animated it that way. So if I move it closer to the original, you can see that as the top part of her arm rotates, the forearm also rotates at the same time, which gives a really exaggerated motion. And if I move it back to its position, you can see that now there's that offset where the top part starts to rotate and the bottom part has to catch up to it. And if I move it farther still, it actually completely offsets it because it's counter-rotating. So most people don't walk counter-rotating their arms unless they're carrying something. And that actually, I think, breaks her elbow a little bit in some of this, looking at that. So if I wanted less follow-through, I would drag it closer to its original. Because then she's bending it. She's bending both of them at the same time. And if I obviously wouldn't want this much, and like this much rotation on her lower arm if the top part of the arm is doing most of the work. So if I wanted a more intentional looking animation, I would remove some of the forearm's rotation. And if I wanted more of a follow through, like limp noodly kinda, I'd add more exaggeration to the forearm and then offset it again. Something like that. Hope you can see the difference between the two. I could have exaggerated it a little bit more, but that's basically the principle. If you want to have something look loose, you have to have a lot of follow through. And if you want something to look very intentional and like the muscles are set, they're not going to move nearly as much. And whatever's doing most of the movement is going to have the largest rotation and the largest graph, and then everything else below it, if it's trying to stay steady, won't animate nearly as much, and you won't get that follow through. Anyway, back to whatever the heck this is. What are we doing again? Talking about arms, and now I have to animate this one. So at this point, her arm is probably swinging back here. The other thing is that you could study how people walk and pay attention to how they use their hands. Like I said earlier, some people just kind of let their hands go. When I'm walking, if I'm not paying too much attention, my hand will actually kind of like bounce a bunch of times just because of the way my arm and shoulder moves as I walk. And it's kind of hard to explain. Most people's arms, when they rotate up, they go like this. And some people do jazz hands. Yes, the usual. Completely normal. Some people do this. Not everyone, but some people. I've definitely seen someone do that. That's your invitation to do that, by the way. Anyway, what was I talking about? I forget. Right. So some people, when they put their arm up, I hope you can see this, their arm swings up like this, their hand swings up like that, and then they go back down and their hand kind of follows through. I don't know, what have you done? And then, right, so mine actually have like a secondary kind of motion, which I'd have to stand up and walk towards the camera, which I can't, but anyway. Some people have weird little discrepancies in the way they walk. With the gardener, at the speed she's going, I'm not going to animate any extra weird sort of bouncing motion, just because at that speed and at that distance that you would see it, it probably wouldn't read very well. Right. So what's happening here is that it's looping when it's not supposed to. Because I had set this up to be looping earlier. There we go. So she swings her arm back. I'm actually going to delete this keyframe because I can put a keyframe somewhere else. Right, this needs to loop at what, 17 was it? 12. How did I get that wrong? The other thing I'm going to do is just disable the root motion. Now that I've figured out exactly how the feet are sticking, I don't need that for now. I'm going to need to fix the cane because it was also offset. Oh, maybe it wasn't. Nah, I'll fix it. I shall fix this later. Beep boop, someone's knocking on the door. Or they're not. They just hit it. Okay. So at this point, her left leg is forward, which means that this arm swings back. It's kind of weird because her arm looks like it might bend exactly in this spot right here, but the elbow is actually up here. The shape of her arm is a little bit unusual. Possibly not for a gardener, but for an alien gardener, I should say. And at 12. I just completely stopped talking there. I was thinking things, I swear. I just stopped saying them out loud. There we go. Why are you doing this? How about no? Okay, that's better. And this is not in the middle either. This should probably go at right there. See, it's another sine curve. Well, if I repeated it, it would look like one. Right, this is exactly what I wanted. Don't need to fix it. Nothing wrong with this. Nothing to see here. This is obviously not exactly polished. Okay. So, as I was saying earlier about follow through, the main part of the motion comes from up here. Although some people walk with their hands, so their hand kind of drives the motion, which is a little bit different. I think for her, this arm is a little more casual. This arm's doing all the work anyway, so this one can kind of swing a little loosely. So if I go to this one, just so that you can see these. I only want this selected. So you can see that the other graphs still exist. If I drag this the other way, I do believe that there's not a lot of rotation on this. Right, that's why. I really did not rotate this one at all. Or the hand. Sorry, my bad. I'll get to what I was doing in a second. Okay. There we go. So, no follow through at all. That's so hard to see because it's so fast. Oh my goodness. This is the counter rotation, right? Where it perfectly balances out everything. And somewhere in the middle, usually on the middle part of the curve, is a follow through that looks okay. In this case, we've got a lot of stuff going on and it's really hard to tell. So I'm actually going to accentuate this motion on the top part of the arm a little bit less, just so that I can focus more of the movement on the forearm. Which means I need to figure out which axis is doing the work, which is the red one, which is X. Okay, so X, cut that out. One of these days I will select the thing. So this one needs to actually rotate a little bit less overall. Go fast. You can see it happening in slow motion here a little bit. You can see that at this point, the top part of the arm is starting to rotate back again, but the bottom part of the arm is just catching up. And it's actually the most rotated, like this way, halfway through when this guy is done rotating in that direction. And then same thing over here. It's this bottom part of the arm is just starting to rotate backwards while the other arm has already started to do that. Quite a bit easier to see when I slow it down. At this point, I would like to zoom out and just check how that reads. Because if it looks good up close but not from the actual distance you would see it in game, then I am not doing my job correctly. I think one of the reasons that this looks so funky is that the hand is actually rotating quite aggressively and it's also not looping apparently. That would help. So if you were trying to animate the hand doing most of the leading motion, you would have it rotate first, and then the forearm, and then the upper arm possibly. Not exactly like that, but something close to that. It looks like she's kind of pulling like water. Probably shouldn't cover my mouth while I'm talking because I'd probably just hear I'm feeling like this is probably the right thing. And I probably need to offset this even more. Yes. You can really see it within the first like 4 frames of this. Now it has a follow through to this one. Okay. It's very subtle. I could exaggerate it quite a bit, but at these speeds, probably not a good idea. there's definitely quite a bit of tweaking that I should do after the fact, just looking at this. I also haven't started to rotate the ribs at all, which is what I'm going to be moving towards. I just find it's easier for me to understand what the body is doing when I animate it kind of in sets and then I come back. It does kind of contradict my point earlier that you shouldn't just animate one thing without thinking about the other things, but I hope that's not what I'm doing. In this case, I start with the legs, move to the hips, and kind of move up the body. And then, now that I know what the legs are doing, I can animate the arm kind of counterbalancing. And then, once I know what that's doing, I can move on to the ribs. And then if I find that the ribs are doing something that affects everything else, I'll move back down and adjust accordingly. And then you kind of get to that happy medium. Otherwise, I have a tendency to spend way too much time making sure each whole body pose is correct before moving on to the next one, which just wastes time, which is unfortunate. So this might not work for everyone. This might, in fact, make people want to pull their hair out, and I apologize if that's you. If you're looking at this and going, why, oh why, did she animate one thing, then this thing, and then move to that, and there's no rhyme or reason. Do your thing. Do the thing that makes sense to you. There's quite a bit of popping that's happening here, so that's another thing that I'm gonna have to look at after this. Yes, that definitely is correct. Arms should always do that. If anyone has any questions about anything I've said, let me know. And I apologize if this was all over the place. I'm not even entirely sure what I got done. Save me from myself, guys, please. Somebody knock some sense into me. Or just wake me up a little bit. It's a little bit more than I am right now. This is exactly what I get for taking a long weekend and staying up late. Don't do that. Or do. I don't know. Have fun. Feeling like if I just move her entire arm back a little bit, that should help. Problem is, Blender does things rotation, then location, then scale, I think. So if you rotate everything, it affects the location of it. Or, sorry, that's not entirely what I meant. If you rotate something, all of its axes are now pointing in a different direction. So if you move something on the y-axis and rotate it while you're moving it on the y-axis, it will go in that direction. Which means that in this case, I can't just get the bone to move backwards. Just in general in global space. I have to kind of offset what it's doing based on its rotation. Why is the location last? Usually the location is first in this graph. Okay. So Y is sometimes this way, and sometimes it's not. Looks like Z helps out with that as well. Couldn't be easy. Yeah, it's not exactly what I wanted, but it's getting there. Sometimes it's hard to figure out the relation between what graph over here is moving what property, just because if you have multiple properties acting on something and it's not exactly clear where the x-axis is or where the y-axis is, you end up just kind of fidangling it. Very technical term. Definitely happens in the industry. Ooh. She does look like she's on a mission. The other problem is it might be popping just because of the way it's updating everything. With this arm at least. This guy over here. It is very hard to tell. I'm actually surprised that I've run out of things to say. Usually I don't do that. Usually I'm very talkative, especially when I'm tired. But today I'm just like, yep, that's it. Those are all my thoughts. All 4 of them. After this I'm gonna have to put this in Unity and check that it is in fact not sliding in Unity. And then if it is sliding, I'll have to figure out where the math went wrong. In theory, Blender and Unity should line up perfectly in terms of meters. If she walks 17 meters in 2 seconds or something, she should do the same in Unity. This particular mesh was scaled a little bit funny and rotated 90 degrees, which I didn't notice. Shame on me. So I fixed that, but the scale is not identical at the moment, which means that I'm finding that I have to kind of animate around numbers that aren't 1. It's not a perfect scale of 1 to 1, it's something a little bit different, which Fred helped me out figure out the math for that. I think possibly the hardest part of this animation will be figuring out what the ribs are doing. It's easy enough to animate when things are symmetrical, like I said, because they're just curves, like sine equations. But in this case, because her one arm is doing something different, I have to take that into account, as well as the fact that the other arm is not doing something different. Which maybe that means that it should be doing something that's not typical. I have 0 thoughts right now. 0 thoughts. I'm just gonna go back to animating, fixing up the curves, animating the rest of this. Will probably take me to the end of the day, but yeah, that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this, even though it was probably a little weird. I appreciate that you ask questions and watch. Thank you. I think I'm going to go for the night. Yeah. Good night, everyone.